Hello, and welcome to the Creative Adventure Podcast, an artist guide to modern freelancing. I'm really excited for you to join me in the tavern today. So get your mead, get your stew, sit down by the fire, and join me for an interview with my very good friend and mentor, Michael Weissmuller. Now, the reason why Michael is super important to me is he took me under his wing when I was in my early 20s and very unclear about my goals. Now, the reason why has been really helpful to me is that he showed me the video game industry. Michael has been part of the entertainment industry since longer than I have been alive. I'm 32, so he's been in an awesome career between journalism all the way to, or then going to Marvel and doing characters at Marvel, story, comic book writing, etc. Then eventually running his own business development in the game industry, and then ending up at Epic Games doing very large business development things. So Michael has been around the block in the gaming industry, and he brought me under his wing. Like I said, he brought me to places like GDC. He included me in meetings that I probably should not have been a part of because I was just unclear with what I wanted to do, and he was so kind as to invite me to stay with him in his home in Croatia for a while, and I got to learn a little bit more about him, and we made an interview, and this is going to be that interview. So sit back, relax, let's listen to his story and get some history about the gaming industry, because if you're not familiar with it right now, it's a little bit on fire between the dirty word that begins in A and ends in I, and also the layoffs that have been happening all across the game industry. So let's learn about Michael's history, and he shares some of his thoughts on the gaming industry and whether it's worth getting into as an artist in the modern day. All right, let's get into it.
Hi, my name is Michael Weissmuller. I am a retired business development uh, guy in video games and comic books. Um, I've done this for, oh God, too long, 40 years almost.
Longer than I've been
40
alive.
years,
Yeah.
fuck me. And I'm here to talk with Jax about sort of my experiences. Enjoy.
Thanks for letting me stay with you.
You're welcome.
So my podcast is more for artists and kind of like approaching the business side of art. And I know we talked a lot about that yesterday, but you've been on the business side for so long, and I've always looked to you, like I said yesterday, I've looked to you as a mentor in this space, and like my dad has been helpful, but I didn't really get to see how business worked whenever I would hang out with him, because he'd just like invite me to dinner. Versus like when you brought me to GDC that one year, like we were able to, like we did a lot of dinners, but we also like there was a lot of actual business conversation happening, not just like, hey, let's go get good food. So my thought about getting a conversation with you or having this conversation was just to like try and get a better understanding of what the video game industry, how it's evolved, how it's changed, and the reason I thought this podcast might be helpful for some of my audience is they can at least feel maybe there's some hope to be had in the video game industry, or maybe we can take some lessons from your experience in the video game industry and adapt it as and change how we look at things with your, I guess, pulse on what's going on. So, first off, can you tell me, just for the audience, tell me a little bit about like your career starting from Marvel all the way to where you're at now?
So I started, I studied journalism, and I was working for a women's magazine, believe it or not, as a editorial assistant, which was interesting, 80 women and me,
Mm-hmm.
but ultimately not for me, or not as interesting as it might sound. So I moved from Germany to England, and there I started working for a publisher, a comic book publisher. I brought over European licenses comic book licenses to them. Artists like Mobius, Bilal, Herman, they were back then big names. Some say still big names, but most of them not with us anymore.
Okay.
So from there I moved to another publisher in London called Fleetway. They were publishing a magazine called 2000 AD. The famous character there is Judge Dredd, and I was working there as an editor, working mainly with UK talent, names like Garth Ennis, Neil Gaiman, Grant Morrison. Those guys were cutting their teeth on that magazine. Alan Moore as well, for that matter. Not with me, but before my time. And from there, Marvel in the UK. We were the guy running the show back then was a guy called Paul Neary. He was an artist as well. He became editor-in-chief and hired a bunch of guys like me to create a line of new characters, Marvel UK characters, which we did to a great success back then. But overall, the comic book industry then, especially Marvel, was dominated by fandom. By fandom, I mean not the fandom you know today. It was people that were buying comic books to collect and to multiple copies even, to keep and then sell at some point for lots of money. So speculative business.
Yep.
Of course, that didn't last that long. The early signs were back then that it's going to collapse. A company like Image Comics started up. Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee left Marvel to do creator-owned stuff, and it was sort of the death knell. The death knell is the wrong word, but it was the death knell of the direct market, or the speculators' direct market. So these guys published their comics to great success. It left Marvel UK somewhat in the lurch. They didn't really know what to do with it or how to react to it. So we created a line of creator-created comics, not creator-owned. They had Epic Comics back then, but it wasn't that successful. So we did that, and it didn't fulfill the expectations of the management. So they shut Marvel UK down. I mean, from creating comic books point of view, they were still doing licensed stuff, comics based on TV shows, animated shows, stuff like that, but not what we were hired for. So I pivoted and started working in the video games industry. A friend of mine worked for a company called Sega back then. I believe Sega still exists.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I don't know. But a company called Sega. So they had a big office in London as well. And as the story goes, it's quite funny. So he says to me, "You know languages, right?" And I go like, "Yeah, I know German, I know English, a little bit of Spanish at a push." Yeah, we need someone like you. You can come in. We need to localize games. You know, the games that come from Japan or from Asia. I said, "Yeah, sure. I'll have a look at it." So I get the obligatory 3 or 4 interviews with the management, and they're all Japanese, by the way, and asking questions and stuff. And I kept pointing out that I only know 2 languages and a third at a push. And they were like, yeah, no problem. So I get the job, and the first day they set me in an office, and there were some games laid out that were prepared for localization. And the first one I put into the Sega Saturn, it was back then.
That is classic. I had that when I was a kid. Okay.
So I put it in Sega Saturn, and it was from Japanese into Korean. So I said 3 languages, and
Yeah.
no one paid any attention. So obviously that didn't work. So I went back and I proposed to them to create what nowadays is commonplace, a localization department with translators, testers, the whole 9 yards. And they did it, and it was great. We had a Spanish, French, Italian, and a German guy to test the games. The translations were done by an agency, and I did sort of corrections into the English so that it is more fluid. The tester's job was to make sure that if it was subtitled, that it sort of flows with the language, with the English language or even Japanese language in some cases. And the territories were very happy that they had localized versions that they could make more money on. So that was my first job in video games. From there I moved to a company called Eidos, did the same thing all over again, but they promised me that I can become a producer, and they kept their promise, but not a proper producer. I didn't produce the video game, I produced the European versions of the video game. So
Okay.
it was okay. It was perfect for cutting your teeth on how these things work. I got to work with John Romero on the ridiculed game Daikatana. It was his follow-up to Doom, and yeah, it wasn't successful.
Okay.
And funnily enough, it was so buggy. They used the Quake engine. It still existed back then, a Quake engine, and it was so buggy. It was impossible to fix in the time frame that it was given. So it was released very buggy, and obviously that's why it wasn't very successful. And I remember a good 10 years after that, I get hold of a copy. They used to sell CDs, obviously, and there was a company that bought these licenses for these games 5-6 years after they first came out, and they produced budget versions. So there was 10 years after us, there was a budget version that I got hold of, and it was the actual first copy that was bug-free that you could play.
Wow.
And
Okay.
it was only $3.99.
Oh, that's so sad. I feel like that's what a lot of games are doing now. They come out super buggy, and
Oh well,
then
nowadays the gamer is the tester nowadays.
yeah, for sure. Okay,
So
that was Eidos.
from Eidos, I met a guy that he was executive producer, and he wanted to set up a company, and he asked me whether I want to do business development for him. And at that point, I had no idea what business development was. I just said, yeah, sure, why not? Sounds like a laugh. So he started the company. His idea. When was this? 2001. Yeah, 2001. Because he was looking for investors. His father and some friend were seed investors, and then the whole thing collapsed because of 9/11. No one wanted to invest in anything.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so it was 2001. That's right. So the idea was to do mobile games before the iPhone. So they were on little flip phones.
Okay. Yeah.
Things, and online games. So that was the business plan.
Okay.
That never materialized, of course, because of the lack of funding. So from there, I went on my own, offered BizDev services, ended up working with a company in London called Start Games. They had a big fund to produce demos. So if there was a concept that appealed to them, that they funded the demo, and then they could go and sell, or my job was to help them then sell this game to a publisher. It had a moderate success. Some successful games came out of it. One of them was called Grand Theft Auto, I believe.
Oh wow. Okay. Wow.
It was the one before the one before the famous one. Okay. So Grand Theft Auto was a top-down little thing when it started.
Okay.
On PC.
I didn't know that.
And it wasn't connected, of course. It was just on the PC.
Right.
and on PlayStation, I think we had it.
Okay.
And it was a Scottish company. And then I think the Rockstar Games bought them, the whole studio, and then they produced
Blew it up into its amazing
in what it is now.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
From there, I decided to start a proper company, an agency that offers BizDev services to developers, publishers, anyone in the game field that was interested. So we did a whole. There was a company in Austria called Joe Wood. They were like a publisher. Had a lot of investment money from Austrian banks. They wanted to get in on this hip new craze of video games, and they needed to. They had some games, but they were very localized in the sense that they were about mountains and trains and stuff that was interesting to Austrian audience or maybe German audiences, but not necessarily to the international audience. So they hired us to look at their portfolio and to internationalize it, which in most cases just meant to talk to the studios to give them an idea of what could work in other countries or what could work for an international audience rather than just a local audience. So we did that for a while. Then I moved to Los Angeles and then started the agency properly. I had some, how many people did we have? 5, 6, I think. They were dotted around the world, but in the US I had 3, and I had a Japanese guy, we had a European guy, I mean, apart from me, but he was sitting in London. And we were serving publishers with developers to produce games that they wanted to produce, original and licensed IP. So the biggest customer we had was a company called Brash Entertainment. They were created by 2 guys that created Skype and sold it to Microsoft.
Okay.
So there were more that involved in the Skype story, but these 2 guys came into this field to do video games, and they met Thomas Tull from what's the company called? Production company produced Dune recently, most successfully.
Okay.
What were they called? It escapes me now. But anyway, they met Thomas Tull, and Thomas Tull said to them, "Look, I'll give you the money if you produce video games based on movie IP." It was done before, but to varying success, and they wanted to tackle it properly. So they were looking for talent. We sold a few Japanese developers to them. Yoshiki Okamoto was the famous one. The creator of my God, old man brain.
Dude, you have a lot of names in
The one with the big sword. Capcom game.
Oh, Soul Calibur?
No, the other one with the big
Final
sword.
Fantasy?
No, Final Fantasy was Square Enix.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Anyway, so he was famous. He was a producer at Capcom for many years, and he was sort of involved in Resident Evil as well. But they had a whole slew of titles that were coming out back then, and the one with the big blade was his creation, his successful creation. So anyway, he started a studio and he wanted to do a new title, but he also had a university for young people. So he had a lot of talent that he needed feeding, so he was looking for contract work. And I said to them they should come and work with Brash Entertainment. There's lots of work, so they ended up working on a sequel to 300, the movie.
Okay.
Which is sort of weird since they all died in the movie.
Yeah.
But I guess they decided to make it a prequel, and then I think it saw the light of day through not Brash Entertainment, because they went the way of all things, the way of the dodo. But it saw the light of day through Capcom. So he went back to his old employer, and they distributed the title.
Mm-hmm.
But it came out, as far as I know. So yeah, so that was that period, about 3 years, I think it was, in Los Angeles. That was good. I moved on to work with Paramount, doing pretty much what Brash Entertainment was trying to do, but with the IP from Paramount. We did Star Trek, we did War of the Worlds, The Godfather. What else did we do? The Warriors, stuff like that. The job was always to find talent to do the game, or to do the IP justice with the game.
Okay.
So of course, in those days, everything was still single player, multiplayer on console or PC. There was nothing as connected as or free to play as you have now. So it was much easier to actually do deals, because the whole industry was hungry for talent.
Right. And just to give a little bit of context, what time period was this?
So we're talking this Brash or Paramount?
Yeah, Brash, Paramount.
Yeah, so we're talking about 2006 to 2010, 12 maybe.
Okay. I look at that as the prime time of gaming, at least for my generation, because that was when we saw Call of Duty,
Yeah.
Halo, World of Warcraft. Like, that was my game. So it seems like you were kind of getting into like the S tier business development during that period.
Yeah, so yeah, it's true. I think I made most of my money back then.
Okay. Okay.
So we made a lot of money. We lost a lot of money, but we made a lot of money too.
Right.
So,
Okay.
but it's how business goes. You win some, you lose some.
Right.
So after the Paramount gig, but Paramount made the usual mistake that big studios like that make with games. They don't know how development cycles work, and they used some movie development cycles which are sort of around a year or so, maybe a year and a half if it's a big production. But that's it. A big AAA game can be in production 4 or 5 years. So it's an iterative process, and you have to make sure that you actually come up with something that people want to play, and that works. So on the Star Trek game, we had a vertical slice, and there was a show in LA. Doesn't exist anymore. It was called E3, and E3 was basically a showcase for new titles for the press and for retailers, because retail was still very much a thing rather than online.
I remember GameStop before the stock stuff. I would line up outside of GameStop for Halo 3.
Yeah,
So.
well, that was the period of Halo.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Xbox One. So we had a vertical slice of the Star Trek game. It was done by a Canadian developer, Michael Schmaltz. I can't remember how his company was called, but he was a great guy, great leader, great visionary, great studio. Unreal back then, already. So had a big team of 50 people on the game. Had a vertical slice. It showed. A vertical slice is there to show what the game is supposed to do. So what you can do in it, the guns, in this case it was a first-person shooter, so the guns, the look of the characters, the costumes, the environments, you're supposed to show all that off, and you're supposed to be able to play it so you get a feel for what it's going to be like. So this one was a level where Kirk and Spock were fighting some invaders on the Enterprise, and the thing we had is you could use other weapons than the phaser. Other games in the Star Trek franchise, you had to strictly stick with the guns that or the weapons that
We're in the TV show.
right.
Yeah.
So in this case, it was simple. Kirk had a phaser. He shot at someone. He was out of juice, but he could pick up the gun of the guy that he killed and then move on. Stuff like this, and so it won game of the show of that year at E3, everyone was excited. Everyone wanted to play the game, and when is it coming? When is it coming? So because it made so much noise, the management of Paramount finally realized that we existed, and said, so we need this in 6 months. And everyone was like, it's impossible. So we negotiated with them, and we got it up to a year. And we said to the developer, what do you think? And they said, like, it's impossible. We could maybe improve on the vertical slice within a year, and then we're still not halfway there. So they projected a good 2.5, 3 year cycle here.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to them, they were like, oh, let's stop the production. Let's figure it out. And the worst thing you can do is stop the production with 50 people on it.
Mm-hmm.
So basically what happened is the production stopped. The developer moved all the people on another project, which was, interestingly enough, a game based on the IP from, not from Wildstorm, the Witchblade.
The Witcher?
No, yeah, it was Witchblade, the game.
Witchblade.
Based on an Image comic.
Oh, okay.
Oh, The Darkness.
Oh, you know what?
It
Okay,
was
I
The
do remember
Darkness.
that game.
It
That
was The
came out
Darkness.
somewhere. Yeah, I remember my dad brought home a copy, and I was like, cool, back to World of Warcraft.
Well, that was the studio, and it pivoted to that.
Right.
And it was quite successful for them, I think. Then eventually Paramount sorted out its woes and realized the error of their ways. So there's another team from that developer went back onto the Star Trek game, but the spark was gone.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a very good game when it was finished. Paramount disowned it and gave it to some distributor to do nothing with it, and it was never.
That's so sad.
And another big factor here wasn't just Paramount. So Bad Robot was the producer of the Star Trek films at the time, and they had a say in the game as well. And they had a lawyer. So Hollywood lawyers. This is how they come into being. So somewhere in the U.S. is a lawyer, and he decides he hasn't got the work he wants, so he doesn't make the money he wants. So he goes to Hollywood and hopefully meets someone like Bad Robot that is in need of a lawyer, and he says, listen, I'm doing it for free. Just let me do it. I'll find the business, and then I'll get my money when business comes in. So this is how they end up having these shysters working for them. But anyway, I'm not going to say the name because he's probably still there. But so he was trying to get business going, and business in this sense made, give me a backhander and you can come into this production. So the Star Trek one was obviously something that he wasn't involved in, but he wanted to be involved in because it was high profile. And so we had Paramount management not knowing what they were doing. We had the Bad Robot guy trying to sabotage it from the other end. And we had a studio that needed to feed 50 people. So, yeah.
It sounds like a kind of a Hydra situation. 3 separate heads, all doing different things.
Yeah, and not to the advancement of the title, only
Right.
to their own advancement.
Right. Okay.
So it was a shame. It would have for the first time I felt it would have actually helped the Hollywood business model of taking IP and making a game out of it. But yeah.
Okay, so
They tried so often before as well.
yeah, every single time you try and take a movie and turn it into a video game, like as a gamer, there's just a lack of trust for those kind of games because they've never been very good. I think the only example,
GoldenEye was
yeah, that was a magical.
But it was because it was on the N64. The N64 was not considered a success. The studio in England was not considered a particularly good studio. The game was funded, so they had the money to do it, and they just did it. And then, it came out to no fanfare, and it got discovered by the fans, and it became this massive hit. And the reputation of you can do a good game adaptation with it. I remember playing it on and on and on. It was quite good.
Yeah, that was I was probably like 6 or 7 when I first saw that game. So you were probably you were a young adult at that point, and I'm sure you just played it with your friends on.
No, it was well, it was work already. Where was I then? The N64. That would have been, I think I was at Sega
Okay.
still,
Okay, so that
or
was the
IDOS
90s.
maybe. IDOS.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's
Okay.
around that late 90s, early 2000s.
Okay. So you were at Paramount, you working on the Star Trek game, and then that evolved into, and you're still doing your other business dev on the side.
No, no, this was all exclusive back then.
Okay.
But I mean, it was my company because that's how Hollywood works. But
Got it. Okay.
it was exclusive for that period for them. They didn't. I was busy. I was so busy. There was nothing else I could have done. So yeah. So but it stopped, and I went out into the biz world to try and find opportunities. And a friend of mine in London, Mike Gamble of Epic EMEA, said he's starting to see a lot of uptake in Eastern Europe of the engine, and I should look at these guys. They're great. They're cost effective, and the quality is up there. So I went to meet a young producer called Alexei Savchenko, and his partner in crime, Scott Cromie, a young guy from LA, and we cooked up a business plan of how to create a company that works through an LA entity, but utilizes the talent in Ukraine where they were situated. They had some 200 people working in that Ukraine studio.
Okay.
And so, yeah, the LA company was the face of the business, based in Burbank, and they utilized this company in the development company in Ukraine to make the games. So we started small. We made a quite interesting. It was a game based on toys, but it was an integral part of the toys. So when you had your iPad or your phone, you bought the toys were all monsters in cars. Monster Madness or something it was called. I can't remember.
Okay.
Doesn't matter. The idea was you buy the toy. You have the game downloaded on your iPad or on your phone, and you take the toy and you put it down there, and then the character was in the game and you could race it. It was a racing game.
Oh, okay, that's cute.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Monster 500 it was called.
Okay, cool.
And it was quite successful. It was it's a shame the company who made it was a contract company for Mattel, so and Hasbro and those things. So if they wanted to make a toy line, they went to that company and they did it. They
Right.
organized it, and this was the first time they wanted to do something by themselves, and they didn't realize that the distribution of the actual physical toys might be a bit more involved than just putting it into Walmart or something. Right? So for the game, we saw a lot of uptake. It was I would have considered it a success as a game, but for them as the toys, it didn't work. So this was our first title with that company. I was very busy looking for other stuff for them, and we did. I mean, everything you can imagine that you could find in Hollywood. So from mobile games to PC games to virtual reality games, and back again. Ultimately, the company, so now today, the company is a $70 million company. They are specializing in porting and recreating games for Switch.
Okay.
They do other stuff as well,
Right,
but
right.
this is their bread and butter.
Right.
So for instance, recently they did the Switch version. So they did the Switch version of all the Dark Knight games. They did the Switch version of all the Borderland games. Switch version for this for Brothers. I don't really remember that.
Brother.
It was a game.
Band of Brothers?
Sorry?
Band of Brothers?
No, it was the Brothers. It was a game where Joseph Fares, he's a Swedish, I believe, filmmaker, and he had this vision of how you could have a co-op game. So you always have to play with someone else to get you out of the scrapes. And this was his first one, and he's made similar games since. And his recent one, I think, is called Split, and it's quite successful, I hear.
Okay.
So, and they've done that as well for the Switch. So this brings us to the present day.
Okay. Yeah. So you've seen the rise of the video game industry, and then as it grew, did it plateau for a little while, and then it just kind of has come down?
It always had peaks and troughs. It actually always goes with the hardware. So as soon as let's start at PlayStation 1. So PlayStation 1 was a massive success. It had a run of 4 or 5 years, and then it peaked and it goes down. And up to its peak, everyone that made games for the PlayStation 1, more or less, they were all hits and you were successful. Then they announced PlayStation 2, so the sales of 1 go down. Everyone has to scramble for the new technology, and it was quite difficult, apparently, PlayStation 2 to develop for it. So they're doing that, and then the early ones looked like PlayStation 1 games, so why the hell, as a consumer, would you want to buy PlayStation 2? So that took a while to get going. So then you have your 5 years high-flying period. You have a year or two where it's sort of not so good until the next one takes off and it goes up again. And PlayStation 2, of course, was the biggest success for Sony. I think up to this day, the most sold console ever. And everyone who did PlayStation 2 stuff really, even if you had a non-hit, you made money. It was, the people were insatiable with that console. And so that's how it worked. Hardware-based peaks and valleys.
So, where are we at now with the industry, especially with like 5090s having crazy hardware, and then also the consumers being able to access some of that, and then also chip shortages, COVID happening? Like, where are we at now in the video game industry?
So about 2010, I think, it became apparent that the free-to-play business model is the one that's going to dominate the industry. Not so much on the console space, but finally, so for a while they could keep the free-to-play at bay with the extra add-ons and downloads, and subscribe to this and you get a steady feed of new content and that sort of stuff. But then eventually Epic, Unreal, the engine was always geared towards the console cycle as well. So Epic always made a game that was showing off the strength of its engine on whatever console or PC is coming in. So starting off with Unreal, obviously, as a game, then Gears of War, and then Fortnite. So Fortnite, of course, is fully free to play, and it sort of pretty much gave the death knell to the paid model. Yeah. So I'm talking to kids today, 13, 14 years old. They've been playing Fortnite or its ilk. Still, they started in COVID because that's when you needed content, that's when you need to do something. So there, a free-to-play shiny co-op game was the thing to play, and they're still playing it 4 years later. And of course, we're again in a recession, financially speaking, worldwide. COVID and the Ukraine war sort of helped us get there, and people don't have any money or don't want to spend any money, so the free-to-play stuff is where it's at. Games has become a hobby market, like comics, like films in a way. It's not something that is rushed out, bought, and played like crazy anymore. It is something that the kids stick with their free-to-play stuff or whatever it is. Call of Duty, of course, is still a big thing, but they stick with that. It's a thing they play. And World of Warcraft, it's a world that's been created, and people are comfortable in it. They know what they're doing, and that's what they. If they spend money, that's what they spend their money on. All the new stuff is mostly played by, or even the older franchise is mostly played by people that grew up with it and now are in their 40s and coming onto their 50s, I would think. So that's where they still make their money. Overall, as a market, it sounds fantastic. Oh, market has grown to another 50 billion this year or whatever. But that's also containing all the mobile games, all this stuff that people are playing, spending a little money here and there, you know. So as an industry, it sounds healthy. As a creative industry, it isn't.
Really?
No.
Okay.
During COVID, all the publishers, all the developers wanted content like mad because they couldn't satisfy the market. I mean, 8 billion people sitting at home doing nothing, more or less.
Right.
So, hiring people, producing games, having a full pipeline. And the pipeline, of course, is 4, 5, 6 years in the future. Then COVID stopped. The Ukraine war started. Recession is knocking on the world's door. People realized they don't have money, lost their jobs. So the industry realized they have a full pipeline. They have hundreds and thousands of people to feed that they employed, and they don't want to afford that. So the last 3 years, the last 2 years has been a massive bloodletting. I mean, I've never seen it like this. You always, if you come into the valley of sales, people always let people go, but it was nothing like this. I mean, there's still every week you get news of this studio closing. These guys have let, even Epic, who never let anyone go, let about 1,000 people go. Yeah, so traditionally, historically, never let people go. So it's the first time as well. But they overextended themselves. They hired too many people. The pipeline is full. They're redundant in that sense. So that's what happened. And then, of course, the almighty AI is coming.
Okay. Going to the whole AI thing, like I'm someone who's living in the creative realm. Like when you're talking about a development of a video game, there's developers who are actually making the stuff and publishers who are probably helping sell and distribute the games. And AI is right around the corner. A lot of artists in my world, they're very fearful of it. I'm a little bit more optimistic on it, but what are your first intuitions on how it's going to affect the game industry?
I think, so there's two answers to that. AI is feared by artists everywhere, not just in the games industry. And I think it's going to cause the death of the comic book. I mean, done by artists, as we know today, a writer and an artist. And I think the people who hold the purse strings are waiting for that, because it's going to be a very cheap option for them at this stage, at least, to produce content that is readable. And I don't think your Joe Average out there knows the difference between a Jim Lee and an AI generated title. The crime here is that they train AI on art and story by people that actually live and exist, and this they're living. But this is the greed of executives everywhere, and they hope not just to create cheap content, but also to have content steadily and readily available without any creative problems. Because when you have a creative environment, there's always problems, there's always delays, there's always something that the money men don't particularly want to happen or can't afford to happen. So in games, I think AI has a very good use, but I don't believe that the powers that be will leave it restricted to that.
Okay.
So if you imagine Call of Duty, we said before, Call of Duty is made with hundreds of millions of dollars every iteration, and it has employs thousands of people all across the world to work on it, mainly artists. A lot of these artists do nothing but cups and saucers and chairs and windows and boring stuff.
Yeah.
So I think AI will be used to generate that, which is probably a good thing, because I mean, if you're an artist and you draw different style cups every day, you're probably pretty bored.
Right.
But of course you don't have a living then, but still, you don't earn a living rather. But maybe it spurs you on to do greater things. So yes, it's probably a good use for it is to generate this kind of content and leave the actual creative content still to creative people that can then splice this into the rest of the work. So for that, it becomes slightly cheaper. It becomes, well, on paper it becomes cheaper. I don't believe in cheaper. At the advent of CGI, everyone's like, oh, everyone's a computer, it's going to be so much cheaper. Yeah, CGI is the most expensive option there is. So there you go. But on paper, this is the idea for games, and the rest should be left to the creatives. But again, they're these lovely, beautiful, greedy little sons of bitches, the executives, who of course would have nothing, would love nothing more than have a slam dunk with a fully AI generated game that cost like fuck all to make, and yeah, and be successful, and then they look great, and their boss is going to give them a raise, and everything's wonderful in their world. I don't think much of executives, I'm afraid.
Okay.
I've worked at Epic, as you know, Epic Games as business development guy, and my job was to deal exclusively with studios and creatives, and yeah. And I also know the executive side of things. There's a world of difference.
Okay, so what is the difference between what you were doing, what developers are doing, and what an executive does?
Well, the job of an executive on paper is to find a title or a developer that can work on a title and make the deal, and then work out a schedule and then get these guys to work. Assign a producer or team of producers, depending on size, and shepherd the title based on the interest of the publisher to completion, and then launch it. So work with marketing and PR and what have you, and distribution to get it into the hands of the people, which is all fair and square. Unfortunately, in my experience, especially the bigger companies, they have executives sitting there who actually don't do anything. They just literally sit there. They talk themselves into the job. They're very good in pretending towards their bosses that everything is okay. They're asked the right stupid questions in meetings. They tend to call for meetings so that it looks like they're busy. And there's also always a cycle, 4 or 5 years, where they are happily making money, these guys, and then they're found out and then they get fired. And then they hire someone else who's more or less doing the same. They're not all like this, don't get me wrong, but a lot of them are like this, and I've met a lot of them. And if you look at the churn of this C-level employees at companies, you can see it, especially if you're branded for long enough. And then they go to another company, and because they have on their CV, hey, I worked for EA, and then at Rockstar, yeah, well, come on in, and they're there for 4 years until they're found out, and then
Okay.
yeah. And in games is suitable for this because you have a life cycle of creation for that long. So until the game has to prove itself, you're pretty much secure.
Right, right. Okay. So I've always looked at like the people who are the most important people in the games business are the developers because they're making the thing. Because obviously you can't have the game and play it if there aren't people making it. And we were talking about this last night, how artists very frequently get taken advantage of with AI potentially around the corner. And as you mentioned just a moment ago, executives would love to have a title that they just hit a button, game magically manifests. They put it on the Steam marketplace and it sells like hotcakes, and they just pressed a button, which, like, obviously that's not going to happen. The developers are very important, but we're seeing all these layoffs left and right. And are these layoffs, are they coming mainly from the development side? Or, like, what is your...
Well, everywhere.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, development side is the studios letting people go because they're too big and haven't got enough work. Because the publishers have a full pipeline and they don't take on new games. So it's a vicious cycle. The biggest problem we have at the moment is that too many people in the industry looking for work and not enough work.
Okay.
Like I said as well, the kids are not buying anything. They're playing, Fortnite or World of Warcraft or, and they spend a little money here and there, but it's not, it's not buying a game for $70 and playing it. Like the older guys are doing that, and a lot of older guys are because they're collecting games as well. Like I'm like one of those. I go every once in a while on Steam and I go, oh yeah, I always liked this game. Oh, I like the idea of it. I'll buy it. It was cheap, probably. It was a sale week, and I'll buy it for $20. Then it's on my PC and I'm not playing it.
Right, right. Okay.
So I just got it.
Right. So, with people, it sounds like people are taking less risks, and as such, game developers and game publishers aren't taking risks because even consumers, like, they're not going to go out and buy the new game. Like, the latest game that I thought about playing, and I'm just like, no, I don't care, is Avowed by Obsidian. I mean, did you hear about that at all? And I'm just like, it just seems like another freaking fantasy RPG. And then Bethesda came out with Oblivion. I heard that's doing okay, but that's a nostalgia play. All this game industry now very much is a nostalgia play. So being in the game industry sounds like 2000 to 2015 was like here, and now it's just going to correct to some baseline.
And it's going to take longer to correct than the usual 4 or 5 years because we're not so hardware dependent anymore. I mean, you can still play stuff on a PlayStation 4 Pro, I guess, but still PlayStation 4. 5 has been out 5 years now, I think. It's still very much in demand. It's powerful enough to play the games that are made. I don't even think Sony is thinking about launching a 6. They probably are, but not in a hurry. Microsoft doesn't need to do anything. They have bought Activision, so they now have a portfolio of games that will make them money. So they don't actually need a console anymore. They could just be a massive super developer. So they don't need to do anything. EA is EA. It has its franchises. They do well enough for them. So Rockstar is the only, or Take-Two is the only one who's always in trouble because Grand Theft Auto 6 is not coming out, and it gets delayed, and it's their big earner. But during COVID, funnily enough, one of the biggest games played was Grand Theft Auto 5 online.
Yeah, it's so surprising. I didn't realize how popular Grand Theft Auto was until recently. Like, I've always been playing World of Warcraft. It seems like what gamers or people who play games crave a way to interact with their friends or interact with the community online in a very cheap way. Like
Yeah.
that's what Fortnite is. That's what League of Legends is.
Yeah.
That's what World of Warcraft used to be because it was it was like the cheapest subscription model that you can get, where there was a full breadth of like community and content at the same time. And now, Fortnite and Minecraft and Grand Theft Auto have replaced that. So, with this correction in the video game industry happening, do you see just more companies? Like, is it all just doom and gloom except for like the big players?
I don't know. Is it doom and gloom at all? It's like it's a correction. So a correction is you get it everywhere. Is that doom and gloom or is it just reality? Because any business is always based on fantasy. I want to do this and I have this idea and that idea and this is my startup and blah blah blah. And then, yeah, you convince someone to give you money and then you do it. And then you add in the real world and then you find out whether it's successful or not. Look how many startups in the past 10 years there were and how many were successful. I don't know, 10% maybe, something like that.
Right. Yeah.
So games is the same thing ultimately. It used to be easy because you had 4 or 5 publishers, you had an idea, you went there with your demo in your bag, there you go, play it. Yeah, we like it, we buy it, there's your money, there's your check, go pick it up. And 3 weeks later or 4 weeks later, it was in the marketplace. If it was successful, great, call you up, come, can do another one. That's how simple it was. But nowadays, the cost alone to create something that competes with your average AAA title is hundreds of millions of dollars.
And one thing that you mentioned earlier that I want to circle back to is GoldenEye. How you mentioned it was like a small studio. They didn't really have a whole lot of street cred, and they put out something amazing. It was just fun to play. Like at the end of the day, being a AAA title doesn't make it a good game. And you've been very close to the indie game world for a very long time as well. Um, what is the difference between like a good indie game versus like a AAA game?
Money.
Okay.
Well, an indie game. I mean, the AAA game is made by committee. Wasn't like that always, but well, everyone was an indie at some point. But it's made by a committee. They designing it's like tentpole movies. They're designing a success.
Right.
And an indie game is mainly made by a group of people in a studio that came up with an idea and find funding for it and do it. And the costs are, my God, you can still nowadays do an indie game for 2 to 3 million. That is of reasonable quality, and the entertainment factor depends on how good the design is. But I can't think of a AAA game that's less than 20, 30 million.
Right. So to me, what that says, like in basic economics, like most people perceive something being a high price as being higher quality, but that's clearly not true with the games industry.
Well, it's higher quality in the sense that there was time spent on it. The more time you can spend on making a game, theoretically, the better it is, because you iterated a lot. You had time to test design ideas and keep them or throw them out and have another one.
Right.
So, and I think to have a modern experience of a game, that's actually important, because you can always see the when someone tries to patch something or they run out of ideas in a game because suddenly, you're running around in a game and it's a stealth game and it's very easy for you to hide somewhere and then pop someone's head off. It's great. Then you do this and you're successful, you don't get caught, but then they ran out of ideas because it's boring to do this for the 10th hour of the game. And then there's a boss. and the boss is the same size as all the guys you just popped off with one shot,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes you a machine gun, a fucking flamethrower, everything to kill the guy. And as a player, I go like, what the fuck? Where's my reality check here?
Right. Okay, so the game went from like 0 to 60
Yeah,
in a
yeah, and
second
it's
with
like
no context.
because they ran out of ideas. They're like, well, it's boring now. I want to have fun. I want to have some, yeah. So, but
Okay.
even AAA games do that. So it's not just down to indies. But AAA games nowadays have time and money to avoid this, to be clever with it, to have a progression that feels more natural and that sort of stuff.
Okay.
Which the indies they just don't have the money or the time, so they just throw it at the end and go, fuck it.
So so you're retired now for the most part. You still work a lot, it sounds like. But where do you want to see, like, one, it seems like you've been passionate about the game industry for your entire career, or at least have appreciated making money from it. Do you want to see it go somewhere, or are you kind of just checked out?
Meh. The games industry will always be there, and it will always be successful, I think, if one way or the other. I still got my fingers in some pies, but I'm not actively doing anything anymore. So that's the retired version. But I'd like people that I met throughout my career that that I've become friends with. I'd like them. They're still very much in the business to be successful, and if I can help them with that, I will.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but at large, I'm here now enjoying the lovely sea and the garden and all these beautiful food that we have here. And I got plenty to do here as well. So.
Well, and that's actually a good transition to end this episode. But like, you've had a really long career. It sounds like it's been fun, but ultimately it was to get to a point where you can kind of relax a little bit. What is, like, you've worked really hard in your career, obviously, to get to this point. Was there a, like, what was the end goal through all the hard work that you did? Like, when I imagine, like, you're a video game character on a quest, you get the big yellow exclamation point from, like, what was your main quest that you were trying to achieve being in the video game industry?
Oh well, I mean, it would have been nice to have a main goal based on a video game, but unfortunately for me, it was I was Super Mario going along, ba-dong, 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 catching
Okay.
all the things that I hop on. To come to the end, it was always those games were always disappointing because it was the end. That
Okay.
was it.
Okay.
So in my case, I don't feel at the end. I still hop along and catch what
Okay.
I can, but it's more. So when I was working for Epic, COVID happened, and Epic was sort of for me the pinnacle of my career because I was hired as a biz dev guy, and they had level 4 employees, which meant you didn't have to you didn't really have a boss. Yeah, I mean you did have one, but you were totally self-sufficient. They gave you a credit card. You walked around to all your clients, and the important ones anyway, and you took them for lovely dinners, and you chatted about what their needs were, what they wanted, what their visions were, and all this kind of stuff, and you put it into a report once a month or so and send it back to HQ, and then you turned up at some company events, and they were usually quite good. People at Epic, by and large, were a good bunch. And so COVID came, and of course, if this is what I just described, your job, and you can't go out anymore, what the fuck are you gonna do?
Right. Okay.
So I'm
Yeah.
sitting at home, and then they said, "Oh, play games." And I'm like, "Oh, fucking hell, I've played enough games. I can't be bothered." So I got bored. I got really, really bored. And then, of course, we had these. When I say by and large, people were good at Epic. We had these by and large not so good people at Epic who started politicking and this and this and that. Oh, and I went like, "Oh my God, I've done this all my life. I think I had enough." So I just asked them to buy me out. They did, and I was gone. And of course, it didn't end there because someone else said, "Oh, would they come work for us?" And I always say yes, which is one of my my disease.
Okay.
I can't say
Being
no.
agreeable.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but ultimately, I saw finishing at Epic as the end of my career in that sense, because I've achieved what I wanted to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
I um, I tasted and lived the very pinnacle of my profession as a business development guy there, and then everything else was just pale by comparison, and so I might as well stop.
Okay. Okay. Seems like rather than having a big main quest, you chose a bunch of side quests.
Yeah. Well, the big main quest is to live well, and to do your job to the satisfaction of everyone involved.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've done that. Of course, there's always some disgruntled somebody, but in general, I think people were very agreeable working with me, and I always try and please and make sure that everyone is happy,
Mm-hmm.
and that most importantly, everyone gets money,
Mm-hmm.
which was my job
Right.
ultimately.
Right. Okay. And I have one thing I do want to share is that I learned Unreal Engine partially because of you, because I knew you worked at Epic while I was just getting into 3D. This was like 2020, COVID happened, and I remember seeing your profile on LinkedIn saying Epic Games, like, oh, I should learn Unreal. Like, and I remember asking, like, what is it like learning Unreal? And I always assumed that you were in the engine for some reason. You're actually been very far, but I just want to say, like, my success in my career is partially attributed to you just working at Epic and being like, oh, I want to somehow be close to Mike in some way. I'm going to learn Unreal. So that's been a thing. So thank you. That's been very helpful to me for you working at Epic. It affected me in a positive way from across the pond, I guess
And I
you
think
could say.
I did hook you up with some guys to
Yeah, you
help you
did.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And they gave me some good insight on resources to learn it beyond just using it for motion graphics. So thank you. Um,
That was more the evangelist's job to
mm,
help people
mm,
with tricks and tips.
yeah, yeah. Um, Most of my audience, they are kind of in the realm of uh, out of college, maybe still in college, mostly artists, not a lot of people doing business. But I do see a lot of people who do need to invest in some business skills to help grow their career. So I wanted to ask if you had any insights or positive words of encouragement or things to look for as the video game evolves with AI, with these development cycles that are crazy. Is there anything that you think the like my generation could use to be more successful in the video game industry?
Well, as we said earlier, the League of Legends, the Fortnites, the World of Warcrafts, the Call of Duties are the hubs of the video game industry. The Grand Theft Auto, of course, as well. So getting a job there is probably what I would suggest everyone should seek,
Mm-hmm.
because you'll have some job security at least for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and you learn the ropes from the inside. The business side, if you're not a business, if you haven't got a business head, there's nothing I can tell you that will make you go, oh, well, I know business now,
Mm-hmm.
because if you don't have the head for it, you won't. So on that level, try and find an agent or find a group of people that you trust and you get along with, and try and find within that group the business guy and tell him you go do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Find an agent. Find someone to vouch
Yeah,
for
but
you.
agent is, if you just starting out, you can't find an agent because they don't care.
Okay.
So, but wherever you are in college stuff, there will be a group of people that you hang out with, and there'll be one or two guys or girls, maybe even, to sorry, not even girls, um, that that have a business head, and then encourage them to do it, and
Mm-hmm.
do it for the group,
Mm-hmm.
and that's probably the best way to do it.
Okay. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode and my interview with my good friend Michael. Michael, if you're listening, thank you so much for taking the time. I had a lot of fun learning about your experience in the game industry, hearing about the the peaks and valleys, the rise of some awesome games like the Star Trek game, and how the free-to-play model has kind of taken over the game industry. Now, if it does sound like a little doom and gloom, I'm actually not super worried about it, because if you want to get really technical, the big players in the industries between Grand Theft Auto, World of Warcraft, Call of Duty, League of Legends, etc., those are the games that bring a lot of people joy, and personally, I probably classify it as a hobbyist in the game world. There's not a lot of people really getting into these older games, but those games are popular for a reason. They're a way to build community, they're a way to connect with friends, etc. So I don't know, what I'm taking from this is, if you want to be part of the game industry, maybe directing some of your efforts and energy towards those those game environments, those game companies, and that would give you some sort of job security. But for me, most importantly, the best part about that would be learning opportunities, learning how to be a better artist, how to be a better creative, and then you can take that and eventually bring it into your freelance career to become more desirable as a creative freelancer. So that being said, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, let me know in the comment section down below. Questions, comments, concerns, whatever else. Comment section is down there for that as well. And as always, ending with a dice roll today. Now, doing the usual D20 because it's been quite nice to me, and we're just gonna roll on whether our next short rest or long rest is going to be restful. And the reason why is I am so jet lagged that I just need sleep, because I'm editing this podcast 2 days after my return home from Croatia, and I'm still wanting to fall asleep at 5 p.m. So, are we gonna get a good night's sleep tonight? Let's see. That is a 12. So we're going to have a half decent night of rest. Hope you get some rest and go make some cool stuff. Until next time, if you enjoyed this podcast, one more thing. Having some sort of review, true honest opinions, does help grow this podcast. So, all right, I'm going to stop talking. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.